Imagine a team where trust is non-existent, where every action is met with skepticism, every word is doubted, and collaboration is hindered by constant fear. Now ask yourself, how would this team thrive? How would innovation flourish? How would individuals reach their fullest potential? Trust is not just a luxury, but an essential foundation for success. So how can we nurture and cultivate trust within our teams? The neuroscientist and researcher Paul Zak learned quite a bit from his study of high-trust organizational cultures, and he said, compared with people at low-trust companies, people at high-trust companies report 74% less stress, 106% more energy at work, 50% higher productivity, 13% fewer sick days, 76% more engagement, 29% more satisfaction with their lives, 40% less burnout. And also, by the way, it perpetuates joy. Experiments show that having a sense of higher purpose actually stimulates oxytocin production, as does trust. Trust and purpose then mutually reinforce each other, providing a mechanism for extended oxytocin release, which produces happiness. So, as Zach writes, joy on the job comes from doing purpose-driven work with a trusted team. Welcome to The Behaviorist with Work Wisdom, where we help you adopt high-performance mindsets, behaviors, communication, and culture. I'm your host, Sarah Colantonio, and this is
Kedron Crosby.
Our intention for the Behaviorist podcast is to share accessible, concrete practices that you can weave into your whole life to begin a shift toward joy and meaningful achievement. Today, we're turning our focus on trust, and we want to explore this really desperate need for trust on our teams and how we can build that trust, how we can get to a much better place than we are now. So, Kedron, I'd like to know, why did you want to talk about this?
I feel very lucky that every day I have opportunities to work with leaders, usually in the C-suite, and I get to hear what their pain points are, what they're struggling with this week. And so the Behaviorist has been this wonderful outlet where I can collectively listen to our clients, and then we can talk on the weekends and give some big answers to the waves that we're seeing, phenomena that we're seeing. So I definitely would say that over the last month or two, almost on a daily basis, I'm hearing from leaders who are feeling that A, their teams maybe aren't trusting them, or B, they aren't trusting their teams. And so I thought this was a good conversation for us to have. Some of that might be residual pandemic decisions that perhaps eroded trust. Some of it might be the Great Resignation, and that we're all a little bit twitchy and not so sure who's going to stick around with that epic churn that happened for years. Some of it might be remote work, that we're having to learn some new habits around hybrid work or remote work, and now it seems like just about everybody's coming back to the office. So how do we reform relationships in person as well? So it could be all those things. It could be the massive layoffs that have been happening in the tech sector. It could be the predictions for a Q4 recession. I'm not sure why, but we're definitely hearing that trust is an opportunity for us to improve our teams right now.
So what do you mean by trust? Because I think it's a pretty abstract word. We know it's a good thing, but how do you think about it?
Yeah, the definition of trust that I use most regularly with our clients is one from Rachel Botsman, and she is the Trust Fellow at Oxford University. And so she's really spending her career trying to understand trust and how we build trust and how we repair trust. And so she has this beautiful definition, which is that Trust is a confident relationship with the unknown.
That's so good.
So if I trust you, I can trust that you will take me into the future, that we have this relationship with what is uncertain, and I imagine that you will carry me into that place reliably, consistently. I always think about when Tommy, our son, who's now 23, was maybe a year old, and we were taking these classes at the YWCA, and he was learning how to swim, and he would be in the deep end, and he would just, the kid could barely walk, but he would just jump, propel his body into my arms in the deep end. He did not know how to swim, but he had a confident relationship with that unknown, with water, that I wasn't going to let him drown, that I was going to take care of him. So he trusted me. So that's the definition that I really like. It's this invisible force that emboldens us to take that step, or maybe even that leap towards uncertainty.
I love that. It's so clarifying.
It is so clarifying, and it's much bigger than how many of us perceive trust. Sometimes when I talk to people about trust, I think the definition feels limiting because they're often thinking about, will this person keep my secrets? Can I share my secrets with this other person? Can I trust them? And Brene Brown has beautiful work on trust and braving, and this vault is the V in braving. And if I share something that's vulnerable with me, will you keep it, or are you gonna slip it out the back door of the vault? That's one aspect of trust, but it folds into this larger relationship with the unknown. And of course, that's what leadership is.
Right.
Can people have a confident relationship with us that they will jump into the big deep end, something that's scary, and they believe that we will catch them?
Yeah. The definition definitely makes sense for teams and for organizations so much. So we really, both of us, are big fans of Anne Morris and Frances Frei and the work that they've done on trust. And they talk a little bit about not just the definition so much, but the drivers of trust. What makes us trust other people? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. And, March 2020 was hard for us and everybody else on the planet. But the best thing that happened was Frances Frei's article came out in Harvard Business Review. It begins with trust. And so she elegantly took all of her research and knowledge of trust and distilled it into this triangle. And so it's fantastic for so many reasons, because it can help us diagnose when we have, when that confident relationship with the unknown has eroded. It can help us to point with precision to why that has eroded. So the triangle has these 3 points, and each of the points is one of the key drivers of trust, and it will build trust or it will erode trust. So the first one is authenticity. So if in fact we are who we say we are, and we're not shining it on, we're not someone who we're not a shapeshifter, we're actually authentic and honest, then we trust that person. We will trust someone who's authentic. Conversely, if someone is inauthentic, we will lose trust with them. And she calls that a wobble, and we can stabilize that wobble. If we realize we have a authenticity wobble, we can take measures to change our language and our behavior to become more congruent and authentic. And then people will trust us again. The second is judgment or logic. So that driver is, do our syllogisms line up? If this, then that. Are we consistent with how we reason? And so, of course, we trust people who have good judgment and logic. And we lose trust if there's a logic wobble. It doesn't mean they're evil. It just means they've got a wobble there, something to become aware of, and then to stabilize. And then the third one is empathy. And so, does this person have your best interest in their heart? And do they even maybe go to the next level of compassion and change their behavior so that you feel that that they care for you? So if someone is not empathetic towards us, we lose trust in them. And so those are the three drivers, and very helpful tool on teams. Maybe rather than saying something that's a bomb like "I don't trust you," maybe use some specificity and say, "I think you might have a logic wobble. Your optimism is not serving you because you say you can get this report done by Wednesday and you never do. So let's stabilize that logic wobble." And so it helps people to continue evolving.
That makes sense. Well, so in the introduction, I spent some time talking about the benefits of trust within teams, within organizations. Unbelievably wonderful benefits. More happiness, more joy, more high performance. People stay in the job longer.
Creativity.
Yeah, right? Yeah. So it seems like, okay, that's enough of a motivator. And then we talked a little bit about what we actually mean by it. So now that we know what we know about trust, what's the next step? How can we use this information to benefit our teams and our workplaces so we can have more meaning, more joy?
Yeah. And, I'm so glad you're asking these questions. And we're sharing this knowledge. And I want to make sure that people understand it's not just for leaders, but if you're on a team at all, you can use this knowledge to better the life of that team. So I think that there are at least 3 tools. Maybe we call them elements that you can put into your trust toolbox so that you can become more skillful as a leader or a teammate in fostering trust. So it's work wisdom. So I'm going to say this. We got to, know thyself, right?
Yep.
So we need to. It's helpful to know some frameworks and have some knowledge, but then also to become self-aware. The 2 frameworks that I think are really essential in the modern workplace are that trust triangle, understanding those 3 drivers of trust, what erodes trust, and then being conversant on your team about those 3 and being able to give and receive feedback around those 3. Because it's so critical. But there's another one that's Erin Myers wrote an incredible book called The Culture Map, where she studies different societies, different cultures, and it really applies to organizational cultures too. And she looks at these 8 different dimensions of culture, and one of them has to do with our orientation to trust. And so you can see it as a continuum. And you can imagine this continuum, and at one end of the continuum, what is normal in some cultures, organizationally or societally, is that we feel trust based on the relationship. So we have a relationship orientation to trust. That means if you have lunch with me and you ask about my kids and you care about me when I'm sick and you care about the connection and the quality of the connection between me and you, then I will trust you. At the other end of the continuum is a task orientation. So some societies, some organizational cultures, some families, trust is built on tasks. So if you complete the tasks that you say that you're going to complete, if you do it accurately and reliably and consistently, then I will trust you. And so it's fascinating to think about this, but we have to understand ourselves and where we on this continuum. And we also have to understand our teammates. And then we have to be able to have conversations, sometimes even laughing ones. And we need to think about how do we recalibrate our behavior. If I have someone on my team who is highly relational, I might spend a little more time talking with them about their weekends and about what's important to them so that they have that confident relationship with the unknown with me. I personally am more task oriented, so I think everybody on our team knows that very well, and it's good that they know that.
Yeah. I think it's always so surprising how with this element, people seem to know almost immediately where they are in the continuum. They're so personally aware. Mm-hmm. But when we do that exercise where we have people stand, in different parts of the room to show where they are in that continuum, there's a surprise there where they know where they are, but they look around at their colleagues and they're like, oh, okay.
That explains everything.
You're over there and I'm over here.
And it's neither good nor bad,
right,
but it's just the water we're swimming in. And we can change too, of course.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and like you said, we have to do that. It's a little bit of a translation, doing the translating. Okay, if this person really resonates with that kind of trust, then it's a back and a forth. Mm-hmm. So I need to understand that, right? I mean,
it's like with everything. Okay, we have more knowledge. Let's let it seep into our awareness. And then once we're aware of it, it's just a much gentler shift in behavior because we know that about them and we know what's going to get them to high performance.
Yeah.
And I think that would be the first, if I was, which I suppose that's what we're doing here, is trying to be helpful to our listeners. The first aspect of how do we improve trust on our teams so we get to all of this incredible fruit, I would say learn those two frameworks, learn where you're at, learn where your teammates are at, and then use them. So that would be the first one. The second element, did you want to ask me something else?
Yeah, I did. Okay. Before we move to the second one, I wanted to ask about the three drivers of trust: authenticity, logic, and judgment, and then empathy. Do you think that just like with the continuum, do you think that people prioritize those differently on teams? Like, do you think that could be a cause of conflict too, or wobbles too, if I really prioritize empathy, but somebody else might really prioritize logic and reasoning? And so we might have a problem if we don't consider the same ones important, maybe?
Yeah, I think this is extremely true, and we always have to think about where's this coming from. So am I speaking with, what is their primary motivation? What is their life's experience? What is their Enneagram type? What is their priority value? And so once we can frame where's this person coming from, we may recalibrate.
Yeah.
But to answer your question, do I think different people prioritize the three drivers differently? Absolutely. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So I think even within our own team, we probably have some people that empathy is trumps, authenticity. We definitely have people who, authenticity trumps judgment. And so all three of them are important.
Yeah.
But just like with values, we have them in different priority order.
Yeah. Okay. So that first tool, I think, is really helpful. Just knowing your trust orientation and where other people on your team, where their orientation where that sits. So what's the second one? I interrupted you before you got to talk about the second one.
Yeah, and the second one has to do with candor. I would say very much expectations. So I think a lot of trust could be improved if we could have clearer expectations with each other, and that we talk about what's important. And so whether it's radical candor, and we're thinking about Kim Scott's work of being that we're caring personally for each other, but we are definitely challenging each other directly, and we're setting those expectations up front. I think we're going to have fewer trust wobbles. I think that's really important. Or, I think a lot about Heidi Grant's work around the neuroscience of leading people through periods of uncertainty, and even leading yourself through a period of uncertainty. And one of the three tactics that she recommends is candor. When we are going through something that's scary and hard and uncertain, that having candor is one of the most critical things that we can do. So how can we speak clearly with as much specificity as possible, painting the picture of what could be, what we want to see, and just being as honest as possible. So I think candor is the second element of how we can prevent trust from eroding. I think about our method of the gap.
Yeah.
So if anybody's interested or hasn't heard of it, they might want to go onto our YouTube or our Vimeo channels and watch an animated short that you drew on our practice called The Gap, which is where we very explicitly say up front what the expectation is. And then we ensure that we talk to the other person and say, hey, does this work for you?
Yeah.
Is this realistic? Can you make this happen? And you have that moment of buy-in. And then if there's a wobble and they fail to meet that expectation, at least you can come back to them and say, hey, we had set this as the expectation. So I think it's also really important that we're humble too. If we haven't been candid, we're here in Lancaster County, and it might be in the water that we want to be more ruinously empathetic than radically candid.
Yeah.
Because we don't want to hurt each other. It comes from a place of love, but ultimately, right, clear as kind, as Brene Brown would say. So I think that if we have failed to set the expectation, and then the other person, you feel like, oh, what's wrong with them? I can't trust them anymore. I think we need to go back and say, is this on me? Like, did I set that expectation or did I just blow right past it? And I just thought they could read my mind.
That's what I was going to say. And it goes back to Erin Meyer, those different dimensions of culture and communication.
Yeah.
And like low context communication is really direct and probably fits into being candid and clear. But high context is like, you can read my mind.
Yeah.
You do know what I want. And if there isn't an understanding of that, we're gonna have a problem, aren't we?
Yeah, that's a really good point.
Yeah. So that's the second one, being candid. What's the third thing?
This might not be popular. I think it's important, if we're really trying to create norms for trust on a team, that we know when to fold them, to quote Kenny Rogers.
Okay.
That there may be people who either are not capable of trusting or are not trustworthy.
Yeah.
And just as we've talked about on this podcast before, when we've talked about talent density, I think the aim is trust density.
Yeah. Wow.
So what does it look like to build a high trust team? And that may mean that people who are not capable of stabilizing their wobbles need to move away.
Yeah.
So maybe, we in one of our offices here at Work Wisdom, we have a Maya Angelou quote painted beautifully by our friend Ayana, and it says, when someone shows you who they are, believe them the first time.
Yeah.
Now, we have a value of compassion, so it might be the second or third or 13th time,
Yeah.
but so I think that's important information. We can't ignore that, And then I think there are also people who have a disposition to be very skeptical, cynical, that they don't trust, and as a teammate or a leader, try not to be too neurotic about it. It might not be you.
Yeah.
It might not be you.
Yeah.
It might be them.
Yeah.
So you might do everything on the planet to have, incredible authenticity and incredible judgment and incredible empathy, and they still might not trust you.
Yeah.
But that might be them.
Yeah.
So I think those are important things to think about. There's this thing that you and I joke about. Maybe it's not joking, but we've never really talked about it. But this special kind of toxic, we've talked about. So, well, do you want to talk about a special kind of toxic? What constitutes a special kind of toxic?
The way that we were talking about it is, I think that when it comes to trust, there is elements that seem trustworthy with the person, but that in reality, it's not. It doesn't really hold water. So an example of this would be, this is like a red flag in relationships, and I think Kimberly Pfeiffer talked about this on a podcast, which is common enemy intimacy. This would be an example of like maybe a surprising, it seems like you're having this intimacy, this trust between each other because you're self-disclosing. I don't like this person because of this. And they say, I don't like them either because of this. And it seems like you're connecting and you're trusting each other with this information. But in reality, it doesn't hold water. It's not really a safe place. It's not a good place. So I always think of that as kind of an example of a special kind of toxic.
Yeah.
Where we don't think of the person as toxic necessarily. They might seem really nice. They might seem really trustworthy, but in all reality, they're not.
Yeah, it's an insidious special kind of toxic, isn't it?
I think so too, because you think, you
They're
think it's
so
fine.
Great. Yeah. I think I've seen a special kind of toxic where they hold power because they give you really critical feedback that's unhelpful, but it builds their dependence on you. It builds your dependence on them.
Yeah.
Because you feel they are courageous. They shared this thing about me, and I now have to depend on them.
Yeah.
To fix me.
Yeah.
And it's just special kind of toxic. We'll maybe need to dig into that again. It's manipulative.
It is.
Yeah.
It's really scary. I think that, there are more maybe obvious examples of when there's not trust. Something that we talk in our workshop called Relate, which is about having those helpful relationships, fostering those relationships in the workplace. There are things like being overly critical and being defensive and dislike of other people, and that coming up again and again and again. And when we see that as like a common thread in the dynamic of the relationship, that's a heads up. Like, okay, you probably should have some boundaries and keep your distance as much as you can. And don't self-disclose. Don't rely on them the same way you would somebody else. But the special kind of toxic you have to have, I feel like you need to have a little more insight and really notice. So there's a balance there to that. But speaking of that, I was rewatching the first season of Ted Lasso, and Rebecca confesses to Ted how she's been undermining him. And he says to her, "I forgive you." And I started crying. I saw it. I mean, I've already seen it, but it made me cry.
Like 3 or 4 times, right?
Yeah, exactly. But so that brings me to the question, what is the role of forgiveness here in trust?
I think it's always wise to forgive. I think we forgive them every time.
Yeah.
And also, what might be true is that they move away from the team. So we can forgive them for being inauthentic or having terrible judgment or not being empathetic. We can even forgive people for doing evil things.
Yeah.
And for the benefit of the company, the team, and yourself, it's helpful to roll up the car window, as we say at Work Wisdom, to put up a boundary and to make sure that you're creating a trust-dense team and environment so that you can have the psychological safety and all of the fruit and benefit that you had talked about before.
Yeah. Okay. That's helpful.
I mean, the forgiveness is for you.
Yeah.
You know,
right.
I mean, it's going to help you be happy and healthy and sleep better. And so that's the best thing you can do for you. And having a boundary may be the best thing you can do for the team.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. I'm grateful to you for being part of this movement of helping others in the workplace enhance their individual and collective team performance. I think this topic is really important for that. Thank you, listeners, for downloading The Behaviorist. We hope you'll subscribe. Please reach out to us through our website, workwisdomllc.com, where you can enjoy Work Wisdom press and productions. You can ask questions and give suggestions of topics you'd like us to explore in future episodes. As is our custom, we'll leave you with a quote. This time it's from Francis Fry. If we learn how to trust one another, we can have unprecedented human progress.